over the window, its claws scrabbling on the glass. The dog didn't worry him too much. He knew how to kill dogs. Ray got out of the car and walked round to the back bumper to inspect the damage. The Honda driver started yelling at him. "You stupid fucking twat! What did you think you were doing?" English. Ray tried to think of something to say that would be non-confrontational, that would calm the guy down. You could see he was a pressure cooker waiting to blow, wanting to blow. Ray adopted a neutral stance, a neutral expression. But then he heard the crowd give a little collective "huh" of horror, and he registered the baseball bat that had suddenly appeared in the guy's hand out of nowhere, and thought, "Shit." That was the last thought he had for several seconds. When he was able to think again, he was sprawled on the street, holding the side of his head where the guy had cracked him. He heard the sound of broken glass. The bastard was putting in every window in his car now. He tried, unsuccessfully, to struggle to his feet, but managed only to get to a kneeling position, and now the guy was advancing with the bat lifted, ready to swing for a home run on his skull. Ray put up an arm to defend himself, made himself even more dizzy by doing that, and, sinking back onto the cobbles, thought, "Jesus, is this it?" He'd given up. He'd actually given up, something he'd never done before. When someone stepped out of the crowd, wielding something square and black, that he threw at the Honda guy, clipping him on the shoulder and sending him reeling. He blacked out again for a few seconds, and when he came to, there were a couple of policewomen hunkered down beside him, one of them saying, "Just take it easy, sir." The other one on her radio calling for an ambulance. It was the first time in his life that he'd been glad to see the police. Martin had never done anything like that in his life before. He was 50, and had never knowingly committed an act of violence against another living creature, although sometimes he thought that might be more to do with cowardice than pacifism. He had stood in the queue, waiting for someone else to intervene in the scene unfolding before them, but the crowd were in audience mode, like promenaders at a particularly brutal piece of street theatre. Even Martin had wondered at first if it was another show. When the Honda driver finished breaking the windows of the silver Peugeot and walked towards the driver, brandishing his weapon and preparing himself for a final victory blow, Martin realized that the man on the ground was probably going to die, right there in front of them, unless someone did something. And instinctively, without thinking about it at all, because if he'd thought about it he might not have done it, he slipped his bag off his shoulder and swung it, hammer throw fashion, at the head of the insane Honda driver. He missed the man's head, which didn't surprise him. He'd never been able to aim or catch. But his laptop was in the bag, and the hard, weighty edge of it caught the Honda driver on the shoulder and sent him spinning. The nearest Martin had been to a real crime scene previously had been on a Society of Authors trip around St. Leonard's police station. Apart from Martin, the group consisted entirely of women. "You're our token man," one of them said to him, and he sensed a certain disappointment in the polite laughter of the others, as if the least he could have done as their token man was to be a little less like a woman. They had all stood in a line-up. One of their members had her fingerprints taken, and they were locked briefly in a cell. At the end of the tour, as if it had been staged for their benefit, they witnessed, with a little frisson of fear, a team being hastily assembled in riot gear to remove a difficult prisoner from a cell. The tour hadn't had much relevance to the kind of books that Martin wrote in the person of his alter ego, Alex Blake. They were old-fashioned, soft-boiled crime novels, featuring a heroine called Nina Riley, a gung-ho kind of girl who had inherited a detective agency from her uncle. The books were set in the 40s, just after the war. When he wrote the first Nina Riley book, he had conceived it as an affectionate nod in the direction of an earlier time and an earlier form. "A pastiche, if you will," he said nervously, when he was introduced to his editor at the publishing house. "A kind of ironic homage." It had been a surprise to find that he was being